Ribal Al-Assad is the founder and director of the Organization for Democracy and Freedom in Syria, which is based in the United Kingdom. And he was born in Syria but has been exiled since he was a child. He has been active in interfaith dialogue and in particular has helped facilitate rapprochement between Alawites and Sunnis in North Lebanon. I don't know how far that rapprochement has gone because I seem still to read about some unfortunate events, but it would be, and I'm not sure whether that is relevant to our theme or not, but anyway, we are very interested to hear what you have to say.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mortimer. And actually, I prepared a little speech, and I thought I was going to be, I was afraid of being too undiplomatic and too honest, but I think Mr. Wadir beat me to that. So let me start with good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be speaking to you all at a forum whose ethos is fundamentally democratic. Freedom and democracy in Syria and the Middle East are not just my subject, but the focus of my life and work. As a Syrian living in exile since the age of 9, it saddens me to watch Syria plummeting into a state of civil war. I remain passionate about my home, its people, and their traditional values of cross-cultural and religious understanding. It is easy to forget that the opposition to the incumbent regime began peacefully as part of the much-heralded Arab Spring. The slide into violence and retribution was started by the response of the brutal incumbent regime with weak leadership. It has escalated because the opposition has been divided and influenced by a convergence of external factors. The complexity of these factors has made it easy for the outside world to label this as a war between evil and good. This analysis is not only oversimplified, but misleading. The regime is tyrannical and barbaric, but the opposition has been divided from the start and has been hijacked by terrorist, extremist, and geopolitical interests, which is why all efforts to create a peaceful democratic solution have failed. In essence, there are three tiers of conflict in and around Syria: the local, the regional, and the global. All three are interwoven, but it is vital to understand how they have combined to create the current maelstrom of violence. At the very highest level, there have been a growing escalations of tension between Russia and China against the US and NATO. Dmitry Medvedev has repeatedly warned that time was running out for the West to secure Russia's agreement to a missile defense shield in Europe. As president, he warned in May about the dangers of military intervention in Syria or Iran. He said, at some point, some actions which undermine state sovereignty may lead to a full-scale nuclear regional war. The Middle East remains a flashpoint of Cold War enmity, and with Syria in flux, it is reported Russian and Chinese ships now patrol the waters of the eastern Mediterranean, close to military vessels from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. Since the start of the uprising, Russia has supplied Syria with arms, including surface-to-air missiles and surface-to-sea missiles, and 3 million gas masks. Russia's alliance with China has manifested itself in combined naval activities in the South China Sea and 3 vetoes of UN resolutions on Syria. Beijing, meanwhile, has created what it perceives to be a US policy of military and economic encirclement. Recently, the US and its allies conducted military exercises in Jordan to enhance their abilities to meet security challenges. On a regional level, a growing schism can be observed throughout the Muslim world. The fault lines are drawn on sectarian grounds, with an Iranian-led Shia axis forming through Baghdad, Beirut, and Damascus, backed by Russia and China for a number of strategic and economic reasons, of course. They are facing up to a Turkish-led Sunni axis encompassing Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and backed implicitly at least by the US and NATO. The growing enmity between Turkey and Iran has also been fueled by economic, strategic, and political factors as they compete for regional hegemony. As a result, all of this, a proxy war, is already being fought in the country and has been for some time. Unfortunately, as with so many complex issues around the world, it is easy for the press and even some politicians with an ear for a soundbite to portray this as the fight between good and evil. The altruistic freedom fighters trying to save innocent people in their opposition to a sadistic dictator murdering his own people. Life is rarely that simple, particularly in the midst of this cauldron of diplomatic and religious tension. And misinterpretation stems from a simple, age-old misguided premise that my enemy's enemy is my friend. In the case of Syria, that means supporting anyone who purports to oppose the regime, irrespective of their motive. In practice, the Syrian opposition has never been unified. For a time, they were purportedly represented internationally by the Syrian National Council, which is now recognized as a facade for the Muslim Brotherhood, as stated by former member Kamal al-Labwani. The Syrian National Council is divisive and divided. It has never been an inclusive opposition. It could not have been further from being democratic. The latest person to resign from the Syrian National Council is Basma Qudmani, who was one of the few women in the Syrian National Council and head of its Foreign Affairs Bureau. This week she said that the SNC has effectively failed and should be replaced by a new political authority. And I absolutely agree with her. But there is irrefutable evidence that Saudis and Qataris are investing petrodollars to provide some of the opposition with arms. It is far from a homogeneous opposition fighting on behalf of the Syrian people, more a collection of groups, including militants and brutal fundamentalists. The evidence now clearly shows that what I have been saying for over a year, that there is Al-Qaeda infiltration and other terrorist groups have and are joining the armed opposition, including many foreign fighters. These extremists continue to be called to action by Islamic clerics on Saudi-owned Wisal and Safa satellite TV channel. From my perspective, much time is currently being wasted in making distinctions between the influence in Syria of Al-Qaeda or non-Al-Qaeda affiliates, Salafi Wahhabi groups. They are all Islamist jihadist groups, radicalizing and militarizing the conflict further, and the conflict will not end until this stops. While it continues, innocent groups continue to suffer, as illustrated by the exodus of Christians taking place in certain parts of Syria. The situation is made worse by the statements of people such as the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, who called for all churches across the region to be destroyed. Syria is now exporting issues too. The conflict is spreading. Violence from the Syrian conflict has spilled over to Lebanon and Turkey. The tragic failure of the Kofi Annan plan requires little further explanation. The plan was undermined by the parties and states involved not acting in good faith. 1 week after the international community agreed on the plan, Qatar and Saudi Arabia decided at the Friends of Syria meeting in Turkey to fund the Free Syrian Army and called for weapons to be given to the opposition, which has led to a disastrous intensification of the conflict. I was entirely in agreement with the plan, all of which makes the behavior of the US, Britain, and much of Europe hard to interpret. At best, it is misguided. At worst, it is hypocritical. A shaft of light has been forthcoming in Secretary Clinton's recent statement that the US was warning countries not to send jihadists into Syria. But those good words fly in the face of her turning a blind eye to Saudi and Qatar doing just that. More recently, the US media has reported President Obama assigning a covert order authorizing the CIA to support the Syrian rebels. The opposition is now receiving portable Stinger surface-to-air missiles. We can only guess where it will end. William Hague has asserted that Britain has sent £5 million of non-lethal aid. If this was all directed towards medicine, then peace might have a chance. But when it funds body armor and communications equipment, then a fine line is being trodden, particularly when they can be used in conjunction with the lethal aid from Saudi and Qatar. Peace is currently a distant dream, but not a dream that is being pursued by the majority of the international community. Syria has become a pawn into a geopolitical chess game. That game is turning ever more violent and sinister, with a regime willing to do anything to stay in power and an opposition being funded to fight them by international influences ramping up the aggression. Syria has become a magnet for sectarian hatred, and an all-out civil war leading to a regional war beckons. But at some stage, discussions will begin. It is vital that, irrespective of their diplomatic agendas, Western countries work solely in the interest of the Syrian people, including its minorities. This means that arming of the opposition must be discouraged in the strongest terms. It means condemning states and extremist clerics, advocating the murder of minorities. It means ensuring that Syrian institutions stay intact and that the regime, the opposition, and their outside backers are pressured into acting in good faith and supporting diplomacy. Finally, and most urgently, it means enticing the Syrian opposition to finally come onto one platform and speak with one voice so an all-inclusive, peaceful, democratic transition can take place. An opposition is not worth supporting simply because of the regime it opposes. It must be encouraged to fight a common purpose and unite. That presents Syria's best and only hope for a peaceful future. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. And we turn now to our last